We're here with Alana Matthews. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I am currently the principal of Strategic Solution, and that is a consulting firm that provides consulting services in the policy areas of criminal justice, workforce development, and environmental policy. And I'm also a former deputy district attorney right here in Sacramento County.
Great, we're glad to have you. Tonight we're talking about the potential legalization of marijuana in California, and I wanted to ask you, how will legalizing marijuana impact the number of African Americans who are incarcerated for use of marijuana?
Well, one of the most significant reforms in marijuana law happened in 2001 when Senate Bill 1449 went into effect, and basically what that did was it decriminalized marijuana, as a lot of people like to say. Instead of having a possession for personal use of up to 1 ounce being a misdemeanor, it's now an infraction that only has a $100 fine. So there's no incarceration associated with personal use of marijuana. The bill that's pending now deals with recreational use, but it was to still have a similar amount associated with it. And I can also say that in Sacramento County, personal use is not a standalone charge anymore. That their office's practice is actually if it is charged, it's charged along with a more significant crime.
How is legalizing use of marijuana different than legalization of alcohol?
Well, I would say one of the most significant differences would be the amount. So let's say if you have a lot of alcohol, it may just be indicative that you're an alcoholic, whereas if you have a lot of marijuana, it could be indicative of something else other than personal use, such as intent to distribute or possession for sale.
And will legalizing adult use of marijuana decrease safety for drivers on jobs like construction and operating machinery?
So legalizing marijuana does not mean that we're sanctioning it for use at any given time. So certainly employers have the prerogative, and I would even argue the responsibility, duty to make sure that public safety is first, employer safety, workplace safety is premier. So even though it may be legalized, it still may not be safe for you to use it on your job. And every citizen has a responsibility to make sure that they are taking that into account.
And is there one thing you'd like viewers to know?
Well, the main thing I'd like to know is that this is an important issue. It will affect the African American community. So the most important thing is to get involved. Educate yourself on the law. If you know anyone who partakes in the use of marijuana, educate them, because we all have to take responsibility for our own actions. And so the more we know, the more we understand the law, we can apply the law, and we can apply it to those who are around us. So that's what I would want everyone to know, is just continue to educate yourself like you're listening or watching this event tonight. Just continue to follow it and make sure you're aware.
Great. Thank you. We appreciate you coming
you.
out. We're here with Dr. Lakeisha Jenkins. Welcome.
Thank you, Valerie. Thank you very much for having me here.
Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Definitely. I have a doctorate in naturopathy, so I'm an ND, and I'm also a registered master herbalist. And I have a holistic health center in the Central Valley where we serve the recommended population by dispensing medical cannabis.
Can you tell me what's holding African Americans back from owning dispensaries?
I think at this point there's a financial component that is definitely holding the African American community back from having dispensaries. Especially when you talk about adult use legalization and you look to those states, there is a certain amount of net worth that you must have in order to even fill out an application. I know in some states you have to have $1 million in the bank, and application fees range from $20,000 to $50,000 in order to be eligible to have a dispensary in those states.
Well, just to even apply, you have to have that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sometimes that's the major barrier. It's the financial liability that's associated with it.
Is the upcoming legislation about recreational use going to benefit the businesses?
At this point in California, I don't believe so. The major initiative that has the most likeliness of passing does not address any of the restorative justice or issues. It doesn't address any of the minority involvement issues. And I believe that those things actually need to have safeguards put in place in the language in order for minority groups to be able to participate in this industry.
Is there one thing you'd like viewers to know?
I think the one thing that I would love for viewers to know is to make sure that they're educating themselves on the language. Watch for each initiative, don't get so headstrong about wanting to have something passed that you're passing over some of the most important safeguards that we would need to have in place, especially for the minority community.
Right. And is there benefits to the safety and in production of having the laws passed?
I think there's definitely benefits there, and probably a way for minority communities to be able to participate if they're looking to ancillary businesses, such as manufacturing of pipes or different things that you can use to actually utilize medicine. I think that there's also a benefit to testing labs and having those safeguards put in place and maybe looking to those areas. But as far as owning dispensaries, unless we actually look at the language and we're mindful about what we're voting for, it's going to be very difficult for minorities communities to be able to participate.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your information.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Good evening. We're here with Deborah Peterson Smalls. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, good evening. My name is Deborah Peterson Small. I'm Executive Director of Break the Chains, Communities of Color, and the War on Drugs. Our mission is to help end global drug prohibition, and our focus is really on educating and advocating and helping to organize communities of color, which, as you know, have been disproportionately affected by drug law enforcement. And our belief is that you can't have a movement that doesn't include and isn't led by the people who are most affected by the issue. And since, at least in the U.S., the war on drugs mostly affects people of color, we believe that they have to be empowered to be at the head of the movement for change.
We're here at the Black Physicians Forum tonight talking about the pending legislation about legalizing recreational use of marijuana. But how is legalizing use of marijuana different than legalizing use of alcohol?
Well, one, it's just taken a lot longer. You know, I mean, honestly, when I think about it, I still find it amazing that it only took us less than 20 years to realize that alcohol prohibition didn't work. But we've had almost 70 years of cannabis prohibition with pretty much the same results. And, you know, the truth is that the concerns that people had that led them to make alcohol illegal were not alleviated by prohibition. We just added the problems. And we've seen the same thing with drug prohibition. It hasn't reduced people's demand for drugs. It's just had them use it in ways that are more dangerous. And it's at the same time empowered a whole set and generations of criminals who have been able to be the principal beneficiaries of prohibition by deriving the majority of the profits.
And there's any difference with tobacco as well, because tobacco is legal, but cannabis is not.
Well, again, for me, the weird part about it is that both of those drugs are drugs that are more harmful to people than cannabis is. No one's ever died from an overdose of cannabis. People have died from alcohol intoxication, and we don't have to talk about how many people die every year from respiratory related illnesses related to smoking. Smoking is one of the few things that if you use it as directed, it will kill you. Cigarettes, and yet we allow that to be legal. And for me, what's really important is that we've seen that how you reduce the public health problems associated with cigarettes is by public education. We've done an amazing job in this country in reducing the number of people who use tobacco products through public education, but for some reason we don't seem to think that that'll work with marijuana, that instead we have to use the stick of police and all of the negative things that go along with that as a way to somehow keep people away for their own benefit.
But how do you see the passing of adult use marijuana legislation impacting families and children?
Well, I mean, you know, I think that it'll impact them in a positive way, quite frankly. I mean, when we talk about the harms of drugs, we never compare them against the harms of drug law enforcement. And yet the reality is that our efforts to try to enforce our drug laws have caused more harm to individuals and communities than the actual drugs themselves, and particularly when it comes to young people. As a parent, I worry more about the effect of my son or my grandson having a criminal record than I do about them smoking a joint.
And how about employment for African Americans? How will it have an impact there?
Well, hopefully, because less of us will be getting arrested and acquiring criminal records for something as minor as marijuana possession, we won't have those things as a barrier to employment, to housing, to getting access to benefits. I mean, again, it's amazing to me that you can be a Wall Street trader, commit million-dollar crimes, pay million-dollar fines, and still go along your way. But if you get arrested and convicted of a minor drug offense, you no longer have the ability to get a job, to get an education, to get decent housing, and your debt to society is never paid. How does that make any sense?
What's the one thing that you would like viewers to know about as we're coming up on this voting for this legislation?
Well, given that your viewers are primarily physicians, there are 3 things I want them to know. The first thing that I want them to recognize is that when Prohibition was first passed, the first thing that the state did was separate doctors from patients. The very first targets of drug law enforcement were doctors. The first major cases that were brought against people for quote-unquote trafficking in drugs were brought against doctors who were continuing to treat patients who had drug problems. So for me, that's not accidental, because that was one way of making sure that this wasn't addressed as a public health problem for people who actually had it. Number 2, people talk about California as being the Wild West of marijuana because, people go to pot doctors. Well, one of the reasons they go to pot doctors is because regular doctors refuse to dispense recommendations. So to me, there's a certain level of accountability that needs to be taken on by the medical profession to actually learn more about marijuana, to learn about its medicinal uses, to be able to talk to people about it, to study it more, and to actually help people who we know are already using it to do it in a way that's healthier and that will allow them to both avoid the harms of criminalization as well as the negative health harms that might be associated with their use.
And anything for the consumer?
Well, so again, for me, the benefit of legalization is that it actually allows consumers to be educated consumers, to know what it is that they're buying, to know what it is that they're using. We don't talk about the thousands of kids who are going to the hospital because they're using synthetic marijuana, which is almost any kind of herb sprayed with any kind of thing that's made to look and smell like marijuana that kids are getting because they can't get the legal thing. Those things are so harmful to young people. It's amazing to me that we would rather see our kids suffering from trying to get a cheap fake drug than being able to get access to a pure, whole, natural drug that is in no way fatal.
Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here, and I hope to come again.
Hello, we're here at the Black Physicians Forum talking with Dr. Wesley Clark about the Adult Use Marijuana Act and the impact of it passing in California on the health of African Americans. Hi, Dr. Clark.
Hi,
Thank you for being here. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
my name is Dr. Wesley Clark. I'm the Dean's Executive Professor of Public Health at Santa Clara University in Santa Clara, California. Previously, I was the Director of the Center for Substance Abuse Treatment at the Substance Abuse Mental Services Administration of the U.S. government.
So
I'm a psychiatrist and a lawyer.
Great. I think the biggest question on their mind is how is passing recreational use, making it legal for people to use marijuana, how is that going to impact the health of African Americans?
First thing we have to recognize is we're going to have to make a guesstimate. We're going to have to predict, and we don't have a lot of data. We do have some experience from Colorado, Washington, Oregon, and we have some experience from the so-called illegal use. What we can predict is that there will probably be an uptick in use by young adults and some diffusion of that use into adolescence. How is that going to impact the health of individuals? Depending upon the level of use, depending upon the factors associated with that use, whether the person is using other substances, whether the person has psychological issues like depression, psychosis, and the use may precipitate some other complications.
Why is it important for physicians and healthcare professionals to be involved with health policy and community advocacy?
Well, physicians play an important role in the lives of people, and as a result can help present an objective opinion about what's going on with their health. They don't just take their blood pressure, they study up on what's going on. People confide in their physicians, they disclose information that they probably wouldn't disclose to other people other than a religious authority. And then that allows the physician to help the person using strategies like cognitive behavioral therapy or motivational interviewing to get the person to see what's going on in their lives from a neutral opinion.
And I know you don't represent the California Medical Association, but have they come out with an opinion on
California Medical Association released a press release last month in February of this year, 2016, endorsing the initiative about which we're speaking. So the idea is to move aside all of these issues about criminal justice involvement and begin to deal with the use that people have.
Is there one thing you'd like viewers, physicians, and consumers to know when they're thinking about whether they should vote positive or negative for a bill like this?
Well, I think this bill will allow the community to get past the issue of felonies and misdemeanors. African American communities, Hispanic communities are disproportionately impacted by the impact of being labeled a felon and being labeled a misdemeanor. You have to disclose to potential employers or to schools that whether you have a felony or not. Some schools will dismiss it, others won't. Some employers will dismiss it, others won't. And when communities of color have trouble finding jobs as it is, we don't need other barriers, artificial barriers imposed on us that keeps us from being able to support our families and lead a decent life.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you coming out and sharing with us.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. We're here at the Black Physicians Forum talking about Adult Use Marijuana Act that's coming up, pending legislation. We're here with Dr. Darren Lattimore. Thank you for coming out this evening.
And thank you for inviting me.
Dr. Lattimore, would you like to share with us your role?
Well, here at the Medical Center, I'm the Associate Dean of Student Resident Diversity. My role is actually increasing the diversity of physicians in the healthcare workforce in order for people from diverse communities to have physicians to take care of them. As part of the Black Physicians Forum, I'm on the advisory committee, so I've been involved in the planning of this project and many others.
Great, wonderful. So I'm going to ask you, I think a lot of people would like to know, how is legalizing adult use of marijuana, how is this a social justice issue?
Well, the social justice problem is that as African American people, we are incarcerated at a much higher rate for possession and smoking of marijuana. If you look at the data, African Americans don't smoke marijuana at any higher rate than any other groups. Matter of fact, Caucasians smoke at a slightly higher rate. However, if you look at who ends up in jail, at least 2 to 3 times more likely for an African American person to end up in jail for possession or smoking marijuana compared to our Caucasian colleagues. That's a social justice issue, not just because we end up in jail, but because that criminalization follows us for life. We may smoke marijuana as a young adult or a teenager, end up in jail. Now we have a record which makes it difficult to get a job moving forward. If we decide to go to college, even to get student loans, to make that a possibility. So something that happened as a youth can actually have a very negative impact on our lives moving forward.
And I know that smoking has been linked to causing cancer, and regular health recommendations kind of advise against smoking. So how is adult use of marijuana, legalizing smoking of marijuana, how is that different?
Well, the data isn't as strong for marijuana as it is for tobacco, but having said that, I will say that there's definitely some studies to show that smoking marijuana does cause lung inflammation. So people who smoke marijuana report coughs more often, they report productive cough more often, they report actually pneumonias and ear infections, believe it or not, more often than those who do not smoke marijuana. Also, unfortunately, the two things go together quite often. People who smoke marijuana actually start smoking tobacco at a younger age. and quite frequently smoke tobacco with the marijuana. So you're actually getting double negatives.
From both the nicotine
The
and
nicotine and the effects of the marijuana causing inflammation in the lungs.
And then, so I think that would be something else people would want to understand is how does cannabis actually impact the health of adults and children, particularly their brain and maybe around mental health?
So from a brain perspective, actually there's new emerging data coming out as we speak. There's actually studies showing, which we knew already, that the brain continues to develop until you're about 21, 25 years old. If you look at people who smoke marijuana and look at the MRIs of their brains, you will see that they actually have less neurons, and i.e. less connections actually in their brains. And that has been well shown at this point. How that manifests is a decrease in intelligence. A person can lose up to about 6 points in IQ. If they start smoking, and it's mainly if you start smoking before the age of 16. Having said that, if you look at the elderly who smoke marijuana, you will see a higher incidence of dementia at a younger age.
Wow. And so, why is it important for physicians and health professionals to be involved in community advocacy and in policy issues?
Well, at least around marijuana, it's important for two reasons. One, we can be a voice for those who don't have voice. So again, we can speak to the social justice issues, but also we can educate our patients. Many people who smoke marijuana see no negatives. There's been lots of discussion and education around the negatives of tobacco, been almost no discussion around the negatives of marijuana. So the society as a whole sees benefit only and no negatives. We need to educate people. Yes, there are. There are respiratory negatives. There is association with cancer potentially. Clearly, we see more mental health issues. And then lastly, as we discussed, if you start smoking at a young age, your brain won't develop to its fullest capacity, and therefore your intelligence probably will never reach its potential either.
Thank you, Dr. Lattimore. We greatly appreciate all the information. I always learned so much from speaking with you. So thank you for being
Well,
here.
thank you. It was absolutely a pleasure to be part of the 6th Black Physicians Forum. I think it's an excellent way for us to come together, talk about the issues in our community, and come up with solutions. So thank you for the work that you do.